Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Aaron Quigley from the University of St. Andrews, where I'm an academic. And today I just want to talk about global HCI. So there are many slides in this talk, many pictures, but I'm going to go quickly. So if you're looking at email, I do recommend that you look up and you maybe get a taste of what it's like being one of my students at the same time. So I think the future, and this quote from William Gibson is quite good, that the future is already here for many of us, but it's just not very evenly distributed. And let's think about what that actually means for the world. And what I'm going to try to do over this course in this next 25 minutes is talk about 9 different aspects that touch all the billions who live on Earth. So it's a fairly compressed talk, shall we say. And where do they all live is the first question to think about, because wherever you live, be it Estonia, Ireland, Germany, wherever you actually are, it's very easy to forget that the world is a broad canvas of different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds, different meanings of family, different senses of what iconography actually means. And when you look to your markets, when you look to who you're getting inspiration from, don't just look locally, look globally. I think many people here already do. But it's easy to forget about how large and how spread out and how different we are, but how similar we can also be at the same time. So see, these are some of the challenges that we face going into the next 100 years. Some of them are quite immediate, some of them are longer-term structural issues that we have to face. And these are 9 things that I wanted to talk about in terms of human-computer interaction and challenges that we might address together. So it is important, I am talking about the computer. I am a professor of computer science, I work on human-computer interaction, so the computer is an essential component of what we do. There are many problems for which we don't necessarily need computers, but for me, I always incorporate the computer into my thinking and my solutions. So these are the 9 facets that I'm going to look at. So let's just look at them one by one. So illiteracy. So today, there are large swathes of the population, not necessarily in Estonia. I guess, again, you're the second most literate country in the world, so not Estonia, but just go not so far from here, and suddenly the illiteracy rates start to grow up. You go further afield from here, they go up quite dramatically. And it's not even that people are fully illiterate, they can have near illiteracy as well. So they don't have high-functioning reading and writing skills necessarily. So I was a teacher in Japan many years ago. There's me trying to teach English as a second language. So if you meet me tonight at the bar, apologies if I correct anything that you say wrong. Feel free to correct anything that I say wrong as well. That's how teaching works. It's a two-way process. And during this time, I became interested in writing. So when I became an academic, I started looking at using a technology that was invented not so far from here I always get this wrong. It's in Sweden, but funding has come from different countries, the Inoto technology for pen on paper. And what we wanted to do here was basically allow people to share their memories with each other, so that I would create a physical book with my memories in it, but at the same time, an automatic copy of that as a digital book would get created. So what I would do is I would basically place my content into the physical book, I would write my physical memories using ink on paper, and I would have my own personal physical copy of the book, but then everybody else could have a digital copy. Now, from this sprang up all kinds of different ideas, one of which was the ability to draw your own interface. So, for example, if you wanted to have an email client today, you need to have an app. But instead of having an app, maybe you could just have a blank piece of paper, and then you could draw the interface that you actually need. And then you interact with the drawing as long as you need it, and then you can just tear up the interface. So where does this come to for illiteracy? Well, it comes to in this way. So later, I started looking at writing and thinking about how do we write and how do we learn to write. And writing is this process of representing symbols. And it varies across cultures, it varies across languages. Some are very simple systems, some are very complex. Some take dozens of years to master, and some are the kind of systems that basically people spend their entire lives trying to master the writing style. But whatever it is, the question that came to me is, can we augment the process of learning to write and continuing to write with digital technologies, and what would that actually look like? So we went on to actually study this, looking at what people do on paper, what people do on a device like a Wacom, an iPad, a LiveScribe, and then looking at different types of styli. Some are pens, some are styli, some are active, some are inactive, and then looking at how children write on these types of surfaces and actually studying that. And then, of course, what you see is that children write quite differently on all these different surfaces. And this is changing all the time. As the technology improves, as the ability ability to write on some of these surfaces improves, as the even learning process around writing changes, the nature of what it actually means to write changes. But then, of course, we have to ask the question, well, what is good writing? So here we actually asked teachers to say, well, what are the important characteristics of writing in terms of staying on the line, the aesthetics, the grip, the writing speed? Now, the essential thing for all of this is that this is what a human thinks. This is what a teacher thinks is important for writing. And for us to develop a technology, we need something that can mimic that process, that can basically watch a child, watch an adult who's learning a second language, watch somebody who's learning a new script, actually watch what they're doing as they're writing and give them feedback as they're writing. Okay? So the idea is that we can augment simple things that actually can have profound impact across the world, because many people still rely on writing systems. So can we actually improve the learning process along the way? And if we can improve it for writing, can we improve it for reading? And what would I do if I wanted to improve it for reading? Well, maybe what I would want to do is I want to be able to take any printed book that's ever been published and actually be able to take a camera and look at any page that's ever been published and recognize that page as if it was a QR code, a barcode, a marker. And if I could recognize that, then I could augment it. So I could look through my phone and I could then see all of this digital content. I could see hyperlinks, I could see links to maps, I could see translations, could see currency lookups, I could see audio, I could see audio-visual products, all linked to physical content. Now, you might not necessarily think you want to hold a phone looking at a book, but that's okay, because things like the Magic Leap and other types of augmented reality displays are coming online. So we can think about augmenting our writing and our reading, and then this question becomes, will this help with tackling literacy and illiteracy? And we might have sort of experiences that look like this, where it becomes a digital physical experience. So you still have a physical book, but you're also getting digital content, merging the two together. So that's just one section of work that I wanted to talk about on illiteracy. I then wanted to talk about aging, because we're all aging. There you go, you all just aged. And again, you're all now closer to death. Sorry, but it's true. We're all aging, and this process is great in many ways, but also, of course, some of our faculties start to diminish along the way. Now, for the most part, interfaces that we have today globally don't really accommodate for that very well. They don't take into account, like you don't type in your age, it doesn't ask you anything about the interface when you're actually using it. But it could. So in this project, what we did was we were looking at face-to-face communication using tabletop computing. So this is slightly older work. And what we were doing here is comparing how older adults interact with this type of technology and how younger adults interact with this type of technology. And where physical movement, frailty, the fact that somebody will basically touch with their fingers, but then maybe will lean their palm down, which will actually cause a reaction on the surface. And what we found is that how these two different groups interact with this type of face-to-face collaborative technology is quite different. And this, the fact that you know the person's mobility, you know their style of interaction, you can accommodate for that when you're building the interface. And that's the important point here. Accommodate for aging. Don't just diminish the experience, but accommodate for it. Another interesting piece of work that we've, so this is just the follow-on for that, we did SharePick. When you're spell checking a document that you've written, you basically are using the computer to help you find problems within it. But for you, and I think there's many visual designers in this room here who build interfaces, who build websites, who build visual experiences, you don't have a visual spell checker, do you? You don't have a digital eye which you can look at a screen or look at a display and say, there's something wrong there. You can look at it. You can ask 50 people. You can do A/B tests with 10 million people. But you can't get a computer to look at it and tell you that something's wrong. But maybe you could, if you could model the eye. And what would that involve? Well, what that involve is thinking about what are you actually trying to do. So in this project, we basically generated virtual eyes. We had a model, we used them to make predictions, and then we adapted the interface, all so that we could look at a visual design. And in this project, we were looking at color blindness, and we were trying to determine which images would be more or less visually stable over time. And how we do this, I realize I need to click up there, is by basically taking a low-level visual model. So this is what's happening inside of the eye, approximately. So here you can see the images being formed sharply, but if there's any type of distortion in the lens, you'll actually get an aberrated image of some form. So what can you do? Well, most of you, hopefully, can still see. Okay, so let me just ask somebody right at the back. The gentleman who helped me with my slides. What letter is that? Still C, very good. Okay, so that's pretty stable. Okay, even after I've blurred it a lot, you can still see that it's C. What about here? Can you see a ripple pattern? Yep, okay. Can you see a ripple pattern here? You can see it here? Of course. That's funny. Of course. Not of course. Because there are people sitting beside you who can't see that. Why? Because our eyes are different, people have defocus, people have astigmatisms, people have different forms of blur, some people have glasses, some people don't have glasses. So never think of course is not the correct answer. You can see it, I can see it because I'm standing right beside it. You can see it because you've got good eyesight and you don't have any differences in your eyes. The important thing for me is this allows me to model what's going on in the eye. And this model says this retains more information and this bit here loses more information quickly. Which means we can do things like this. We can take standard eye charts, which you'd normally show to a human, and show them to the virtual eyes. And then we can score them and say, yes, this is what our 3,000 eyes tell us should happen, and this aligns with what we would expect from optometrists. What does that mean? Well, that means we can start looking at things like fonts, and instead of saying we like font A versus font B, we can say this font is more perceptually stable than that font, which means you can see it at greater distances with greater clarity over greater ranges of visual sight. And this is one small part of an eye model, okay? You can do a lot more. So let's also think about the future of healthcare. I'll just give you one quick example of this. So this is a project that I did in Ireland a number of years ago. We published this paper, and what we were doing is looking at real-time assessment of walking and turning in elderly adults. This is one of 40 papers that ended up creating this company called Kinesis. And this has been shown to predict falls within 3 months of patients with Parkinson's disease. So one small research paper, which is born out of a human-computer interaction study, helped give rise to a whole line of technology that's specifically around allowing a technology to predict when someone's going to fall. Not to depress you, but if you have an older relative and they have a fall and they need hospitalization, it's not good for their long-term health. Okay? I'm not going to give you the depressing statistics. Okay? So what you want to have are technologies that can predict when somebody is likely to fall, not telling me they're currently on the ground. That's too late. That's helpful, but they've broken their legs and they're currently lying in a state that's bad. You want to have a predictor that can say, this person has likelihood to fall, and then can we amend the environment accordingly? And these are the kind of technologies that you can actually use. Again, we can also think about population and population movements and challenges, and we're facing that in Europe right now. We're facing that all over the world. And one of the projects we did in the past was actually studying this. Now, this is the tip of an iceberg, so to speak, because this is just a small subsection of a census piece of data. And the important thing here is to basically surface up this data in very simple visualizations. Not so much for doing these type of proportion judgments, but for looking at this, looking at flow, looking at where do people move from and to, and what does that actually look like on a large-scale geographic sense within a country or within the world as a whole. So this is called pi flow, which actually shows you where everybody, or when people moved from California to all the other states, where did they move and in what volumes. And then you can do the same sort of visualization with node correction for looking at different types of mobility patterns within this motion. So that's the kind of stuff that we've done in some of these areas, but I want to kind of get on to some of the other more HCI type of pieces of work that we've done. Because in terms of education, the student who was working on the handwriting also was very interested in where the technology basically gets embedded in practice. So in this case, we were just studying over a long period of time how iPads were being used in schools. And what did this look like? Well, it looks like this. This is a classroom in Scotland, so this takes a long time to actually get into and study and then actually understand how technology is being used today. So what we did was we collected observational notes, photographs, lots of video, and lots of interview data over a long period of time. Okay, so if you're doing this type of in situ, longitudinal type of study, you need to go back into the environment many, many times. You need to have lots of repeated interviews, you have lots of study interviews, lots of video recording, lots of statements being collected, and this is over the course of a long period of time that you're basically interrogating the groups. And from this, you learn certain things. What we learned was that sometimes the iPad is just being a functionary. It's just basically being a laptop stand, a very expensive laptop stand, a book stand, I should say. Sometimes it's a facilitator. Sometimes it adds as an aid to the child who's actually using it. Sometimes it actually means something different to me. It means, for Daisy, it meant that it shows what something actually means rather than being told what it means. So it improves her ability to connect with the concepts. Or for the teacher, it allowed the children to suit themselves. So each child was unique and different, and rather than the teacher trying to do a one-size-fits-all delivery, they allowed the students to create their own suited learning environment using the iPad. But it also means for Anne that it engages her a little bit more in the task. She was a little bit more engaged in spelling by having this as a facilitator type of device. In some cases, it allowed Kate to encourage her to write more because she didn't like her handwriting, but with the digital technology, she was able to her creativity was unleashed and she was able to write a lot more because she liked what she saw. Sometimes it's a facilitator. This is what it looks like to be a facilitator. So they're basically working on a piece of paper, they're gathering all the information, and they're searching for something. And watch very carefully. At a certain point, they find what they're looking for, and they screenshot it, because they don't want to lose it. Because the ability to record information on these devices as they're set up in the schools in Scotland is not good. So the screen grabbing is basically what they do. It also means that they might be using it as a prop in their facilitation. It might also mean that they're just using it as a functionary tool, where here they're basically replacing traditional classroom materials, like existing calculators just get replaced with the iPad, or reading and writing materials get replaced. Sometimes, of course, they just want it as a companion, a security blanket. Literally, they just want it there. They want it within reach, they're not using it, but they want to feel they're supported by this digital companion. And then they also want to make this companion their own. They start to personalize the background, they start to personalize the foreground of the object. So they make it something that they feel is supporting them in their learning environment. But of course, sometimes it's also a foe. And this is what we found. Sometimes it's a facilitator, a friend, a functionary, but sometimes it's also a foe, because it inhibits their learning, because it acts as a distraction. Another project that we've done is actually thinking about the distance that we actually get from these displays. So like iPads or large displays. And to me, the area that I'm really interested in is here, when things are basically undetectable and so subtle that the user doesn't even notice we're doing the change. Not to trick them, but just to add and remove content to focus them on the task that they have at hand. So let's look at this display. This is what's called a dual-based display. From one angle, you see one piece of content. From a different angle, you see a different piece of content. Two people can see the same screen at the same time. One can see subtitles in Estonian, one can see subtitles in English on the same screen. Okay? It's also distance-based, so as I get further away, the font size gets bigger. Okay? So if you watch here, you see there's no font here, there's no subtitles, and then suddenly I sit on the other side, and bang, there becomes subtitles. And you think, how does that work? Okay? This is now becoming a product. Okay? This is a company over in the States called Misapplied Sciences. You have to look at this photo and think carefully about where the photographer is and what the photographer is seeing. The photographer is standing here, looking at a screen of mirrors, and behind them is a monitor. And from all of these mirrors are at slightly different angles. So they're all looking at the monitor that's behind the photographer, and they're seeing it at slightly different angles. One monitor, multiple points of view. Does that make sense? Which means you get parallel reality pixels. Up to millions of independently controllable light rays can come off of a single pixel. Which means you could have an entire stadium all looking at an individual unique display off of one point in space. It's quite an incredible technology. And it's the same basic principle that we studied a number of years ago. Okay? So we go on, we also think about government, and what would government actually look like in the future? So I have a PhD student right now who's building a whole legal platform around this for visualizing information, basically, again, bubbling up this huge corpus to make it easier for anyone to actually interrogate legal documents and actually interrogate and understand the concepts that they're seeing. One of the tools that we also are building is a system called Debate, and this, again, is quite timely given the political discourse that we have in the world around us and how our governments aren't necessarily as connected to us as we would hope. So here it allows, hopefully, hundreds of thousands, millions of people to collaborate on the discussion of content like real-time videos or debates in real time. Bringing in evidence, bringing in questions, bringing in concerns, weighting and reweighting, showing the relevance or the irrelevance of particular argumentation to basically build up evidence bases so that somebody at the top line can actually use that to inform their discussions and their debates with others. There's lots of examples of stuff that we've done in terms of computing. So we've basically tried to get away from the notion of a single device and a single display. And what we've tried to do here in Multify is this. Basically combine multiple displays into one so that what you would end up getting is something that looks like this. So in your hands, you have a handheld display, but in your eyes, you have a different display. And we stitch the two together, which means all of the displays in your environment can suddenly have this extended space around them. And this is what you're seeing in the head-mounted display, and again, this is what you see on the handheld display. And we just have questions of visual fidelity and what we can actually see. We've also done this with gaze tracking and actually trying to accommodate for your attention, because this is a precious resource that's being overloaded at the moment with lots of the environments that we're actually looking at. This is a study of a multi-display environment and actually using simple face tracking to actually determine what content we should or shouldn't show. Likewise, we're actually using our bodies as interaction devices as well. So if we're moving independently of other people, we see one type of display, but if then we move in unison together, we then snap the display into one, and suddenly the environment understands we're a group, and as we move as a group, we see one display as a group. Okay? We've also done on-body devices with this type of wearable interactions where you can actually just use gestures and commodity devices to interact with these types of displays. And all of these are just simple new forms of computing using commodity devices to get new types of interaction in the environment. We also sometimes look at the constraints that we actually have in these environments. So for example, one hand is gone or one hand is encumbered. Then how would you interact with a keyboard? And this is a system called SWIM, which is shape writing in motion. So this is a gesture keyboard. Does anybody use a gesture keyboard on their device? Wow, not popular at all, okay? Gesture keyboards are basically where you draw a line across the keys, and that line draws out the shape of a word. And then the system recognizes it. Here, you're rolling a ball, and the ball traces out the word, and then you just tap with your thumb to say yes. The idea is that the other hand is encumbered, so you can actually use this to interact with the system. Okay, this is a small experiment. I do have time. This is called change blindness. So the idea here is that I can basically use the distance to your face to adapt what the display would actually show you. I'm now going to show you a display, and I want you to look at the display on the left or the right, and see, do you see a change? Okay, so everybody watch. I'd focus on the right. The right is the easier one. Sorry, the left, excuse me. The left is easier to watch. So watch on the left and see, do you see a change? Okay, hands up if you saw a change. Excellent, that's way lower than we would expect. Right there. Watch again. Thinking. There we go. This. And it fades out as I move it away. And then as I bring it back, it fades in again. You think, oh, you're tricking me. It's not a trick. It's based on a well-understood concept called change blindness. When something happens like this and it doesn't trigger a certain visual flicker, you don't see it, which means we can adapt displays based on how close or further away they are to you. Not trying to trick you, but just trying to add and remove content to focus your attention on things. We've also done a little work on global trade. How we do this is looking at the past. So this is a project called Trading Consequences. So this is a visualization, and again, this is a tip of an iceberg type of project. This took basically all the available historical data from the British Empire about where they raped and pillaged, where they went out and harvested the resources of the world and brought it back to the motherland, and it traces all of that and actually shows you what was going on. And interestingly, we couple this to, let's say, weather patterns. It also coupled it to search results, also coupled it to all the trading documents that was basically going on. And there's amazing patterns that you see here. Things that were only produced in Sri Lanka then start being grown in other countries because the weather patterns actually match, and the economy for that particular thing was going through the roof, like Pecha Kucha. The last thing I wanted to kind of show you is some of the ideas that we've had around, how to deal with crime. And the idea where this came from was from work that was actually done in Bangalore and in Cuba and in Sri Lanka. And it's written up in a paper that we didn't author, but called Beyond Yesterday's Tomorrow: Future-Focused Mobile Interaction Design by and for Emergent Users. And what they mean by emergent users are these types of users. Okay? These are users who currently don't have technology, who maybe don't have a potentially a high degree of literacy, who don't have access to lots of of lots of resources that many people, possibly many people in this room, would just take for granted. And they're studying what their needs are. And one of the biggest needs they had was to be able to interact with their technology in discrete and private and non-obvious ways, because to do otherwise was to draw attention to them, and they would get in trouble with their employer, they would have the device stolen from them, or they would have other issues in their environments. So from this, came up with this idea, like, could we camouflage our technology in the environment around us? What would that actually look like if we could camouflage? And to do this, we came up with this concept called discrete computing, where we make things discrete. And one of the elements of discreteness, we can argue as to how discrete this is. Again, this is a PhD student, so acting abilities are not great. This is called itchy nose. Okay, so in itchy nose, can you turn up the audio? In itchy nose, we can detect flicking, pushing, or rubbing of the nose. And this is all done by repurposing a set of sensors that are normally used for eye tracking in glasses. And then just using simple machine learning techniques, we can actually recognize the flick. When this was released, the first thing in the media that people all wanted was basically this in a nightclub for Tinder. So you could basically swipe left or swipe right, swipe left or swipe right. Not 100% sure that's going to take off, because once everybody knows that's going on, you'd be very suspicious of your date if they start going anywhere near their nose. Okay? So the video goes on and shows you different kind of uses and examples of what this would actually look like. Another case I wanted to just quickly kind of end on is, how many of you have a mobile phone? You laugh. How many of you in a social situation place your phone face down on the table if you actually have it out? Excellent. You're my users. This is SpecCam. What this does is, it uses the front screen as a multispectral light source, flashes out a quick color pattern. We use that, we learn what the object is touching and on, be it carpet, be it tile, be it floors, be whatever it actually is. And then we use that and we learn that, which then means we can recognize all these different surfaces that the object is actually being placed on, so that in the future, when it's replaced on that surface, we can trigger an action, play a particular bit of music, open a particular application, close something, turn on lights, turn off lights. And it's all discrete because the phone is face down. The same idea is based on what we use in RadarCat. RadarCat is using the Google Solly device. I better end here. I'll just let this play. So the Google Solly device is a radar chip, basically, that looks up, and then the energy is reflected back, and we train with that, which means we can then recognize various objects that are placed on it, like glass, water, and different things like this. This went on to give inspiration to a video that we released that was seen 1.2 million times. We did it for fluid and powder identification. Other people went on to look at glucose levels. And recently we published this paper on exploring tangible interactions with radar sensing, which is just using simple sensors that would already be in devices globally to do new forms of global human-computer interaction. I'll jump on and I'll say thank you. Lots of thank yous to all my authors and collaborators, lots of other people, and I'll end there. That's me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, look, I've got 3 seconds. Sorry.
That was fast.